I only went to the mechanic because my car kept making this awful grinding noise every time I turned left. That was it. No dramatic setup, no crazy coincidence. Just me, standing in a sweaty garage at 8 in the morning, regretting buying a used car off Facebook Marketplace from a guy named Turbo Mike 92. And somehow, 2 days later, I was lying awake at midnight because my mechanic had called me back for something important. Something that definitely had nothing to do with my car. My name's Hugo. I'm 26, and until all this happened, my life was painfully predictable. I worked remote doing boring marketing stuff for a startup that kept calling itself disruptive while underpaying everyone. I lived alone in a tiny apartment over a vape shop. My social life was mostly texting friends memes and occasionally going on disappointing Tinder dates. So when my Honda started making noises like it was actively dying, I figured my week couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. The garage was about 15 minutes from my apartment. Small place, family owned, the kind with faded signs and old tires stacked outside. I almost left the second I parked because the noise stopped completely when I pulled in. Of course. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, debating whether to pretend nothing was wrong and drive away before some mechanic charged me $80 to tell me my car was probably fine. Then someone knocked on my window. I looked up and nearly forgot how to function for a second. Tall guy, dark hair, grease on his forearm. Gray t-shirt stretched tight across his chest like the fabric was fighting for its life. He had one of those faces that somehow looked intimidating and warm at the same time. "You the one with the Honda?" he asked. His voice was rough, deep, calm. I rolled the window down. Yeah. What's it doing?" I explained the noise badly because I suddenly became incapable of speaking like a normal human being. He listened anyway, nodding slightly. "Turn it on for me." I did. Of course, the car sounded perfectly normal. I wanted to disappear. The guy leaned down near the hood, listening carefully before glancing back at me with the smallest smirk. "It always does that when you bring it to the mechanic," he said. I laughed nervously. "So, my car's gaslighting me?" "That, or it likes me." That made me laugh harder than it should have. He smiled a little then. Not fully, just enough to completely ruin my emotional stability for the morning. "I'm Jeffrey," he said. "Pull it into Bay 2. I'll take a look." I spent the next 20 minutes pretending not to stare at him while he worked, which was difficult. Very difficult. Jeffrey moved like he'd done this his whole life. Confident, focused. One hand braced against the hood while the other worked a flashlight underneath. His forearms flexed every time he tightened something, streaked with grease and veins. At one point, he slid out from under the car on one of those mechanic creeper things and caught me looking. I immediately looked away so fast, I nearly gave myself whiplash. Smooth. "You can come see this," he said. I climbed out awkwardly. He pointed underneath the front wheel area. "Your brake rotor's worn down bad. That grinding noise is metal on metal." "Is that expensive?" He gave me a look. "That depends how emotionally attached you are to having functioning brakes." I groaned. Great. It could be worse. How? You could have ignored it another month and died dramatically on the freeway. I laughed again. That became the thing with Jeffrey. Everything sounded funnier when he said it. He fixed the brakes that afternoon. I stayed longer than necessary because he kept talking to me while he worked, asking questions, teasing me for knowing nothing about cars. Apparently, I made expressions he found entertaining. "You look stressed every time I explain something," he said while tightening a bolt. "Because I don't understand any of the words coming out of your mouth." "That's fair. You could literally tell me my transmission fluid needs more transmission in it, and I'd believe you." Jeffrey snorted quietly at that. God, his laugh was attractive. When everything was done, I paid at the front desk, trying not to seem disappointed the conversation was over. Jeffrey wiped his hands with a rag and leaned against the counter while I shoved my card back into my wallet. "You should be good now," he said. "Thanks. Drive it around a little. If it still feels weird, call us." I nodded. Then, for some reason, neither of us moved. There was this weird pause. Not awkward exactly, just lingering. Like both of us noticed something shift. Then another mechanic yelled Jeffrey's name from the back, and the moment broke. I left feeling strangely disappointed, which was ridiculous. He was just a mechanic. A very hot mechanic with giant hands and forearms that belonged in a thirst trap compilation, but still, just a mechanic. Or at least that's what I told myself. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was making pasta. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. "Hello? Hugo?" The second I heard his voice, my stomach flipped. "Jeffrey?" "Yeah." I leaned against the counter automatically, suddenly way too aware of myself. Hey, you busy?" Why did that sound loaded? "Not really." There was a brief pause on the line. Then he said, quieter this time, "I need you to come back to the garage tomorrow." My stomach tightened. "What? Why?" Another pause. "It's something important." And the way he said it made my heart start pounding for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with my car. I barely slept that night, which was stupid, I knew that. But the way Jeffrey had said "important" kept replaying in my head over and over while I stared at my ceiling like an idiot. Maybe they forgot to tighten something. Maybe my brakes were about to explode. Maybe... No. My brain kept drifting somewhere else entirely. To his voice. To the way he looked at me at the garage. To the weird pause before I left. I hated how much I was reading into it. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was being dramatic. So naturally, I spent 20 minutes picking a shirt before leaving. The garage looked quieter than usual when I pulled in. Only 2 cars outside. One of the bay doors open. Jeffrey spotted me almost immediately. And for some reason, the second his eyes landed on me, his expression changed. Subtle, but noticeable. Like he was relieved I actually came. "You made it," he said, walking over. I got out of the car slowly. "You sounded mysterious enough that I thought my engine exploded overnight." One corner of his mouth lifted. "Nah, your car is fine." "Then why am I here?" Jeffrey glanced toward the office. "Come inside." That immediately made my heart start acting stupid again. The office was small. Tiny fan buzzing in the corner. Coffee smell lingering in the air. Jeffrey shut the door behind us, and suddenly the space felt way too cramped. Or maybe that was just because he was standing so close. I crossed my arms. "Okay, now you're scaring me." He rubbed the back of his neck once, which surprised me. Jeffrey didn't seem like the nervous type. Then he looked at me, directly. "You left something here." "Oh." Instant relief. "What was it?" He reached into the desk drawer and pulled something out. My hoodie. The black one I tied around my waist while waiting there 2 days ago. "Oh my God," I said. "I didn't even realize." Jeffrey nodded slowly, but he still looked strangely tense. "You could have just texted the shop number, though." "Yeah, but you called me personally." Another pause. "Yeah." Now my heart was definitely pounding. The room went quiet for a second. Then Jeffrey leaned back against the desk and folded his arms. "You want me to be honest?" That question alone made my stomach tighten. "Probably." He exhaled once through his nose like he was debating something. Then finally, "I could have just left it at the front desk." I swallowed. "But?" His eyes stayed on mine. "But I wanted to see you again." I actually forgot how to breathe for a second. The silence after that felt huge. Not awkward. Heavy. Charged. Jeffrey looked calmer now that he'd said it, but there was still tension in his shoulders, like he was waiting for me to react badly. "You called me back here for a hoodie?" I asked quietly. A faint smile pulled at his mouth. "When you say it like that, it sounds pathetic." "No," I said quickly. "No, I laughed nervously. "I wasn't expecting that." Neither was I. Something about the honesty in his voice made my chest tighten. He wasn't playing games. You could tell. Jeffrey looked like the kind of guy who usually kept things locked down tight, controlled, careful. So the fact he admitted this at all felt weirdly intense. "I wasn't sure if you were—" He stopped himself. "What?" He looked away briefly before meeting my eyes again. "Interested." "Oh. Oh." I tried to hide my smile and failed immediately. Jeffrey noticed, and for the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely nervous. That somehow made him even hotter. "I thought I imagined the whole vibe," I admitted. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "There was a vibe?" "Don't make me say it out loud." Jeffrey laughed softly. God, that laugh. "You were staring at me a lot," he said. I covered my face instantly. "Okay, cool. I'm leaving forever." He stepped closer before I could turn away. "Hey." His voice dropped lower. I liked it. That did something dangerous to me. The office suddenly felt too warm, too small. Jeffrey was close enough now that I could smell soap and motor oil on him at the same time somehow. It shouldn't have worked. It really shouldn't have. But it did. Badly. "You seriously noticed?" I asked. "Hugo, you looked at me like you were trying to solve a math equation." I laughed into my hand. "I hate you." "No, you don't." The way he said that made my stomach flip hard. Then neither of us spoke again for a second. The tension shifted. Different now. Quieter. His eyes dropped briefly to my mouth before returning back to my eyes. That tiny movement nearly killed me. "You know," Jeffrey said softly, "I almost didn't call." "Why?" "Because I wasn't sure if I was reading you wrong." You weren't. His jaw tightened slightly at that, and suddenly he looked very aware of how close we were standing. I could feel it too, every inch. Neither of us moved away. Outside the office, I could hear distant metal clanging from the garage bays, a radio playing somewhere faintly. But inside that room, everything felt still. Jeffrey looked down at me again, slowly, carefully, like he was giving me time to stop him. I didn't, not even close. His hand landed lightly against the desk beside me first, then the other, not trapping me, just close enough that my pulse started hammering. "You're making it really hard to focus right now," he murmured. I let out a shaky laugh. "That sounds like a you problem." That earned me another quiet laugh. Then his expression changed again, softer this time, more serious. "You nervous?" "A little." "Me too." I stared at him. "You? Seriously? You think mechanics are immune to panic? You seem very emotionally stable." Jeffrey snorted. "You met me one time." Fair point. Then his fingers brushed lightly against my wrist. Barely there, but it felt electric anyway. My breath caught instantly, and Jeffrey noticed that too. His eyes darkened just slightly before he said quietly, "Tell me if I'm moving too fast." I don't know why that got to me so much. Maybe because most guys didn't ask. Maybe because everything about him looked rough around the edges, but he handled me carefully anyway. It made my chest ache in this weird, unexpected way. "I think," I said slowly, "if you don't kiss me soon, I might actually lose my mind." That finally broke him. Jeffrey smiled fully for the first time since I met him, and then he kissed me. Slow, warm, careful for maybe half a second before I grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him closer, which apparently surprised him, because he made this low sound in the back of his throat that immediately destroyed whatever functioning brain cells I had left. His hands settled at my waist, firm, big. The kiss deepened slowly after that, both of us figuring it out in real time. And somehow it already felt dangerous, like this wasn't going to stay casual for very long, not even close. I'd kissed plenty of guys before. Good kisses, bad kisses, drunk kisses at bars I regretted immediately after. None of them felt like this. Jeffrey kissed like he'd been holding himself back for a long time. Like the second he started, he wasn't sure how to stop. His hands stayed firm on my waist while mine clutched the front of his shirt, and I could feel the heat coming off him even through the fabric. The office suddenly felt way too small, way too quiet. Every tiny sound felt amplified, my breathing, the faint creak of the desk behind me, the low exhale Jeffrey made against my mouth when I kissed him harder. That sound nearly ruined me. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us moved far. His forehead rested lightly against mine for a second while both of us caught our breath. "Well," I whispered. Jeffrey laughed softly. "Yeah. You're definitely not calling customers back for hoodies normally, right?" "Only the cute ones." I groaned immediately. That was smooth enough to make me suspicious. It sounded cooler in my head. I smiled despite myself. Jeffrey looked down at me again, calmer now, but there was something warmer in his expression than before, less guarded. It made him look different somehow, softer. And weirdly, that got to me more than the kissing did. His thumb brushed lightly against my side. "You hungry?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "What?" "I skipped lunch." "That's your transition after making out with me in a mechanic office?" Jeffrey shrugged slightly. "I'm trying to act normal." "You're doing terrible." I noticed. I laughed again, and he looked weirdly pleased by that. Like he enjoyed making me laugh. That realization settled somewhere dangerous in my chest. Because this suddenly didn't feel like flirting anymore. It felt like the beginning of something, which should have scared me more than it did. Instead, I heard myself say, "Okay, food sounds good." Jeffrey grabbed his keys off the desk immediately, almost like he thought I might change my mind if he waited too long. The diner we ended up at was a few blocks away from the garage. Tiny place, red booths, old jukebox near the wall. Jeffrey seemed to know everyone there. The waitress took one look at him and smirked. "Well, this is new." Jeffrey rolled his eyes. "Don't start." Too late. She looked directly at me. "He never brings anybody here." "Oh my God," Jeffrey muttered. I was trying so hard not to laugh. The waitress winked at me before walking away with our drink orders. Jeffrey rubbed a hand down his face. "I'm quitting my job tomorrow." "No, please stay. This is incredibly entertaining for me." "You're enjoying this too much." "I really am." He shook his head, smiling despite himself. That was the moment I started getting into real trouble. Not during the kiss, not in the office. It was here. Watching this huge, intimidating mechanic guy get flustered because a waitress teased him about me. It felt weirdly intimate, like I was seeing parts of him other people didn't. The conversation came easily after that, easier than I expected. Jeffrey told me he'd been working at the garage since he was 19, that his uncle owned it originally before retiring, that he almost became a firefighter at one point, but changed his mind last minute. "You regret it?" I asked. He thought about it for a second. "Nah." "You like fixing cars that much?" "I like knowing how things work." Something about the way he said that made me look at him differently. "And when things don't work?" I asked. Jeffrey's eyes flicked toward me briefly. Then I figure out why. There it was again, that intensity, quiet but heavy. I looked down at my fries before he noticed how much that affected me. Too late, probably. "What about you?" he asked. I shrugged. "I mostly answer emails and pretend to understand marketing meetings." Jeffrey laughed. "No, seriously, what do you actually like?" That question caught me off guard. People didn't usually ask it like that, like they genuinely wanted to know. "I draw sometimes," I admitted. "Yeah?" "Mostly stupid stuff." "You hiding talent from me already?" I smiled into my drink. "You've known me for like 3 hours total." "Still counts." The waitress brought our food, interrupting us, but the weird warmth stayed. And honestly, that scared me a little. Because attraction was one thing. This felt different. Comfortable. Dangerously comfortable. By the time we left the diner, the sun was starting to go down. We stood outside near Jeffrey's truck for a second while traffic moved past us slowly. Neither of us seemed in a hurry to leave.
Then Jeffrey shoved his hands into his pockets and looked at me carefully. So, this is usually where people decide if I weirded them out. I blinked. You think you're the weird one here? You'd be surprised. I smiled faintly. I'm not weirded out. His shoulders relaxed slightly at that. Good, because I wasn't lying. If anything, I wanted more, which was probably obvious by now. Jeffrey stepped a little closer. Not enough to touch, just enough that I noticed. I should probably warn you about something, he said. What? I haven't done this in a while. That surprised me. A while for Jeffrey could have meant 2 weeks for all I knew. Men who looked like him usually didn't struggle for attention. How long is a while? I asked carefully. He looked mildly embarrassed. Almost 2 years. Oh, that was not what I expected. Seriously? Jeffrey nodded once. After my last relationship ended, I kinda stopped trying. Something tightened in my chest. What happened? He looked away briefly toward the street. He cheated. The answer came simple and flat, like he didn't enjoy talking about it. I immediately regretted asking. Sorry. Jeffrey shrugged lightly, but his jaw tightened a little. Wasn't your fault. Still, something about hearing that made him feel suddenly more human. Not just this impossibly attractive mechanic who kissed me in an office. Just Jeffrey. A guy who got hurt. A guy who looked nervous around me despite pretending otherwise. A guy who called me back over a forgotten hoodie because he wanted another excuse to see me. And somehow, that made me want him even more. You know, I said quietly, for someone who hasn't done this in 2 years, you kiss very confidently. That earned me a real laugh, low and warm. Good to know. Then his expression softened again. You want to come over tonight? My pulse jumped instantly. Not because of how he said it. Actually, the opposite. There was no pressure in his voice, no assumptions, just genuine interest. And somehow that made the question feel more intimate than if he'd tried being smooth about it. I looked up at him. Yeah, I said softly. Jeffrey's eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary. Then he smiled slowly. And for some reason, that smile felt more dangerous than the kiss had. Jeffrey's apartment was above the garage. Apparently that should have been obvious, but somehow I hadn't considered the possibility until he parked behind the building and killed the engine. You live here? I asked. He nodded. Perk of never leaving work. That sounds either convenient or horrifying. Depends on the day. We headed upstairs through a side entrance, and I immediately noticed how different everything felt from the garage downstairs. Cleaner, quieter, warm lighting instead of fluorescent shop lights. It still felt like Jeffrey, though.
Simple furniture, dark colors, neat without looking staged. There was a faint smell of laundry detergent mixed with motor oil that somehow lingered on everything around him. You want a drink? He asked, tossing his keys into a bowl by the counter. Water's fine. He grabbed 2 glasses while I wandered carefully through the living room, pretending not to snoop. There were framed photos on a shelf. One of Jeffrey with an older guy I assumed was his uncle. Another with a dog. I pointed immediately. You have a dog? Jeffrey looked over from the kitchen. Had one. My face fell instantly. Oh no. He was old. Happened last year. Still sad. Yeah. There was that softness again. Quiet. Hidden under everything else. I looked back at the photo. Big golden retriever practically climbing onto Jeffrey while he laughed at the camera. The image did something dangerous to my brain, because apparently seeing giant mechanic men cuddling dogs was my final emotional weakness. Jeffrey handed me a glass. "You okay?" "You're annoyingly likable." He snorted softly. "That sounds painful for you." "You have no idea." He leaned against the counter, watching me with that same steady look he always gave me. Not intense exactly, attentive, like he actually focused when I talked, which honestly felt rarer than it should have. "You nervous again?" he asked. "A little." "Why?" I laughed quietly. "Because this feels weirdly not casual." That made something flicker across his face. Not panic, relief. "Good," he admitted. And wow, that hit me harder than expected. Jeffrey looked down briefly before continuing. "I'm not really interested in casual anymore." The honesty in his voice made my chest tighten again. This man was terrifying. Not because he was intimidating, because he kept saying exactly what he meant. And I was starting to realize how dangerous that was for someone like me. I sat down carefully on the couch while Jeffrey stayed standing nearby for a second. "You know," I said, "most people would wait longer before admitting emotional things. Should I start lying more?" "Probably not." He smiled faintly, then finally sat beside me. Not too close, just enough that our knees brushed slightly. The contact felt small. It absolutely wasn't. Silence settled between us for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt heavier than conversation, like both of us were thinking the same thing. Jeffrey broke first. "You're staring again." I groaned immediately. "I need to stop doing that." "No," he said quietly. "You really don't." My stomach flipped hard. "You flirt like you're trying to kill me." "That's not intentional." "That's worse somehow." Jeffrey laughed softly. Then his hands settled against the couch beside mine, close enough that our fingers almost touched. Not quite. "You can touch me, you know," I murmured. His eyes lifted to mine instantly, and something changed in his expression again. Darker this time. Warmer, too. Jeffrey's fingers slid carefully over mine first. Slow. Testing. Like he still wasn't fully sure this was real. I intertwined our fingers before he could overthink it. That tiny action made him exhale quietly through his nose. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah." But his voice sounded rougher now. I squeezed his hand lightly. "You seem surprised I'm into you." Jeffrey looked at me for a long second before answering. "You're easy to like." "That is objectively false." "No," he said calmly. "It's not. Nobody should have been allowed to talk to me like this. Not with that voice. Not while looking at me like that." I felt my face getting warm and immediately looked away. Jeffrey noticed. Of course he did. "You blush easy," he said. "I'm leaving." His fingers tightened around mine before I could move. "No, you're not." The low amusement in his voice sent heat straight through me. I looked back at him slowly. Big mistake.
because Jeffrey was already watching me with this steady, heavy look that made it impossible to think clearly. The tension shifted again after that. Less nervous now, more certain. His thumb brushed slowly across my knuckles once, then again, and somehow that tiny movement felt more meaningful than half the brief relationships I'd had in my life. You know what's embarrassing? I admitted quietly. What? I had a crush on you like 10 minutes after meeting you. Jeffrey smiled immediately. Yeah? Yeah. How bad? I considered damaging my car on purpose. That actually made him laugh. A real laugh this time. Head tilted slightly back, shoulders shaking once. God, I wanted to hear that sound constantly. You're insane, he said. Your fault. Pretty sure that's yours. Wrong. Jeffrey shook his head, still smiling. Then his expression softened again as he looked at me. You have no idea how hard I tried not to call you. That surprised me. Why? Because I knew if you came back here, he hesitated slightly. I was probably screwed. The way he said it made my chest ache unexpectedly.
Not lust this time. Something softer, scarier. I don't know what came over me then, but I reached up and touched his face gently. Jeffrey went very still, not pulling away, just still, like nobody touched him carefully very often. My thumb brushed lightly against the stubble along his jaw. You look at me like I'm something important, I admitted softly. His eyes held mine. You are. That did it. Actually did it. Before I could think too hard about how emotionally compromised I suddenly felt, I leaned forward and kissed him again. Jeffrey responded instantly, one hand sliding to my waist while the other cupped the back of my neck carefully. The kiss felt slower this time, deeper, less uncertain, like both of us already knew we were in trouble now. Neither of us seemed interested in stopping it anymore. Kissing Jeffrey on his couch felt different from the office, more dangerous somehow, because now there was nowhere to hide behind nervous jokes or accidental tension. No interruptions, no garage noise outside the door. Just him, just us. And the way Jeffrey touched me now made it obvious he'd stopped holding back. One hand stayed firm against my waist, while the other remained at the back of my neck, fingers sliding slowly into my hair whenever he kissed me deeper. It was unfair how easily he affected me. Every tiny thing did damage. The roughness of his hands, the warmth of his chest under my palm, the low sound he made whenever I kissed him back harder. I was genuinely losing the ability to think straight. Jeffrey pulled back just enough to look at me. His eyes were darker now, focused completely on me. You okay? He asked softly. I laughed breathlessly. You ask that a lot. Want me to stop? No. His thumb brushed lightly along my jaw. I just want to make sure. That got me again, because underneath all the tension and flirting and attraction, Jeffrey handled me carefully, like he cared how I felt every second we were together. That was becoming the real problem, not the chemistry, the tenderness. I leaned forward and kissed him again before my brain could spiral any further. Jeffrey responded instantly, one arm pulling me closer until I was practically half in his lap. The position sent heat rushing straight through me. I could feel how solid he was under me, broad chest pressed against mine, his hand spreading warm against my back. Wow, I murmured against his mouth.
He smiled faintly. What? You're very distracting. That seems fair considering what you're doing to me. The roughness in his voice made my stomach tighten hard. I looked at him carefully. You seem calmer than me. I promise I'm not. You hide it well. Jeffrey hesitated for a second before admitting quietly, I'm trying really hard not to scare you off. That caught me completely off guard. I pulled back slightly. Why would you scare me off? He looked almost embarrassed saying it. Because when I like someone, I get intense. The honesty in that nearly ruined me. You called me back over a hoodie, I pointed out softly. I think we're past subtle already. That earned me another quiet laugh. Then his expression shifted again into something warmer. You still came? The way he said that made my chest ache, like he still couldn't fully believe it. I touched his face again automatically, fingers brushing lightly through the short hair near his temple. Jeffrey leaned into it before he could stop himself. That tiny unconscious movement hit me embarrassingly hard. You know what's weird? I admitted quietly. What? I feel like I've known you longer than 3 days. His eyes stayed on mine. Yeah, he said softly. Me too. The room went quiet again after that, heavy in a different way now. Not physical this time, emotional. And somehow that scared me more, because attraction fades sometimes, but this felt like the beginning of getting attached, dangerously attached. Jeffrey must have noticed the shift in my expression because his hand moved gently along my back. What's going on in your head? I laughed quietly. Too much. Tell me anyway. I looked down briefly before answering. I think I'm trying not to freak out over how easy this feels. He got very still for a second. Then, Hugo. The way he said my name made me look back up immediately. I don't want easy because it's temporary, he said quietly. I want easy because it feels right. Cool. Awesome. Now my heart was actively malfunctioning. You always talk like this? I asked weakly. Jeffrey smiled slightly. Only when I mean it. I stared at him for a second too long, then kissed him again because I genuinely didn't know what else to do with all the feelings suddenly happening inside me. This kiss turned slower, softer, less desperate, more intimate. Jeffrey's hand slid carefully along my side while mine rested against his chest, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath his shirt. That somehow grounded me.
This huge, intimidating guy who looked like he belonged in a truck commercial was nervous too. I could feel it, the slight tension in his breathing whenever I touched him first, the way his hands paused occasionally, like he was checking whether I still wanted this. It made everything feel more real, more equal. Eventually, Jeffrey rested his forehead lightly against mine again, both of us smiling a little now. You hungry again? He murmured. I blinked. Again? You barely ate earlier. Oh my God, I laughed. Are you always trying to feed people? Maybe. That's dangerously boyfriend behavior. The second the words left my mouth, silence hit the room. Not awkward, just sudden. Jeffrey looked at me carefully. You saying that scares you? I thought about it honestly. A little. Me too. At least he admitted it. That helped somehow. Jeffrey brushed his thumb slowly against my side once before speaking again. But I think I'd rather be scared than pretend I don't want this. There he went again, saying things directly into my chest, like he was trying to permanently alter my brain chemistry. I smiled helplessly. You really don't do casual. Nope. Good. That answer surprised him slightly. You mean that? I nodded once, and the smile Jeffrey gave me after that felt so genuine, it actually made my stomach flip. Then his phone suddenly started ringing from the kitchen counter. Jeffrey groaned immediately without looking away from me. Please ignore that, I said. I want to. The phone kept vibrating. He sighed heavily before finally standing. Probably the garage. I watched him walk into the kitchen, shamelessly staring this time. Jeffrey caught me immediately over his shoulder. You're doing it again. I know. Not helping my concentration. That sounds like a personal issue. He shook his head, answering the phone. I could only hear his side of the conversation. Yeah? Pause. No. Check the battery first. Another pause. Then, you serious right now? I tried not to laugh at the annoyance in his voice. Jeffrey rubbed his forehead while listening. Finally, he sighed. Fine, I'll come down. He hung up and looked at me apologetically. One of the guys messed something up downstairs. How dare they interrupt your dramatic romance arc? Jeffrey laughed softly. I know. Rude. I stood up slowly. You should go. He looked genuinely disappointed by that. I'll be quick. It's okay. But Jeffrey still walked back over to me immediately. Close again. Warm again. His hand settled lightly at my waist. You leaving? I nodded slowly. Probably before I decided to move in emotionally. That earned me a quiet laugh. Then his expression softened. Can I see you tomorrow? The fact he asked that so quickly made something warm spread through my chest. Yeah, I said softly. I'd like that. Jeffrey leaned down and kissed me one more time, slow enough to make leaving feel genuinely difficult afterward. And as I walked toward the door a minute later, I realized something terrifying. I was already looking forward to missing him. The next morning, Jeffrey texted me before I even got out of bed. Jeffrey, car still alive? I smiled so hard it was embarrassing. Hugo, barely. I missed the mechanic already. The typing bubble appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Jeffrey, you trying to flirt before coffee? Dangerous move. I laughed into my pillow like an idiot. This was bad, very bad, because I already liked texting him too much. The entire day felt weird after that. Every time my phone buzzed, I checked it instantly. Every single time. Jeffrey sent random things between work. Pictures of a dog that wandered into the garage. A photo of someone's completely destroyed tire with the caption, "This man said it started making noise yesterday." A blurry selfie where half his face was cut off, because apparently giant mechanic hands weren't built for phone cameras. I stared at that one longer than necessary. By 6 that evening, I was fully distracted at work and pretending not to be. Then Jeffrey texted again. Jeffrey, come by after work? No hesitation. Hugo, already putting shoes on. His response came almost instantly. Jeffrey, cute? Absolutely unbelievable behavior from a man who looked like he fixed motorcycles in action movies. When I got to the garage, the main bays were already closed for the night. Only the office light was still on. Jeffrey opened the side door before I could even knock.
"You're early," he said. "You text like a boyfriend." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "That bother you?" "No," I admitted immediately. "That's the problem." Jeffrey smiled slowly, then stepped aside to let me in. The garage felt completely different at night. Quieter, dimmer, more private. Music played softly somewhere near the back, while Jeffrey locked the door behind me. "You still working?" I asked. "Trying to." "But—" He walked closer. "But you showed up." "Okay, cool, awesome."
I was never emotionally recovering from this man. Jeffrey reached for my hand automatically now, like he'd already gotten used to touching me. That realization hit me strangely hard, because I liked it too much. The familiarity, the ease. "You eat yet?" he asked. I stared at him. "What?" "You literally cannot stop trying to feed me." "You complaining?" "No, I think I'm weirdly into it." Jeffrey laughed softly, squeezing my hand once. "There's pizza upstairs." "See? Boyfriend behavior." This time he didn't even look flustered. Instead, he looked directly at me and said calmly, "Maybe I like the sound of that." My stomach flipped so hard it physically hurt. "How are you real?" I muttered. Jeffrey grinned slightly. I ask myself that every morning. We headed upstairs again, but things felt different now. Less nervous, more settled. Like we'd already slipped into some quiet routine without meaning to. Jeffrey tossed me one of his hoodies while he grabbed plates from the kitchen. "Wear that," he said casually. I looked down at the hoodie, then back at him. This is also boyfriend behavior. "You gonna keep saying that every 5 minutes?" "Yes." "Fair." I pulled it on anyway. It smelled like him, which immediately became a problem. Jeffrey noticed my expression instantly. "What?" "Your hoodie smells good." That made him pause for half a second before looking weirdly pleased with himself. "You're cute," he said quietly. I pointed at him dramatically. "See? That." He laughed again. I was starting to realize Jeffrey laughed more around me than he probably expected to. That thought warmed me embarrassingly fast. We ate pizza on the couch while some random movie played in the background neither of us paid attention to. Most of the time we just talked about stupid things. Music, bad jobs, childhood stories. Jeffrey admitted he failed his driver's test the first time because he got distracted arguing with the instructor. "You?" I asked, horrified. He was wrong. Jeffrey. He was. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my pizza. That was the moment it really hit me. I didn't just want him physically. I liked him. Actually liked him. The kind that sneaks up on you quietly until suddenly it's everywhere. The kind that makes your chest feel too full when they smile at you from across a couch. The kind that makes leaving harder every time. At some point, Jeffrey stretched one arm along the back of the couch behind me. Casual, but intentional. I leaned closer without thinking. His hand slid slowly onto my shoulder afterward. Warm, heavy, comfortable. "You know," he murmured after a while, "you fit here weirdly well." I looked up at him carefully. "Yeah?" "Yeah." The way he said it made the room suddenly feel quieter, more intimate.
Jeffrey brushed his fingers lightly along my arm. Then his eyes dropped briefly to my mouth again. That tiny look still affected me instantly. I shifted closer. His hand moved automatically to my waist. And suddenly, we were kissing again. Slow at first. Familiar now. Like both of us already knew how the other moved. I climbed halfway into his lap without even realizing it, until Jeffrey's hands tightened instinctively against my hips. His breath caught slightly. That sound alone almost killed me. "You're really dangerous," he murmured against my mouth. "That's rich coming from you." Jeffrey smiled faintly before kissing me deeper again. The warmth between us built slowly after that. Steady. Heavy. His hands moved carefully along my back while mine slid into his hair. Every touch felt deliberate, wanted, and somehow the softness of it all made it more intense, not less. Eventually, I pulled back just enough to breathe. Jeffrey looked up at me from the couch, hands still resting on my waist. And the way he looked at me then, God, like I was something precious, something he still couldn't believe was real. "You okay?" he asked softly. I smiled helplessly. "I think I'm in trouble." His expression softened immediately. "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "Me too." I tried to act normal after that. Key word, tried. But once you realize you're catching real feelings for someone, everything starts feeling loaded. The way Jeffrey looked at me when I talked. The way he automatically reached for my hand. The way his entire face softened every time I walked into a room. It was ruining me. And the worst part? I don't think he was even trying to. A week passed like that. A really dangerous week. I started spending almost every evening at his apartment above the garage. Sometimes we'd order food and watch movies we ignored completely. Sometimes I'd sit in the office while he finished paperwork, just because I liked being near him. Once, I fell asleep on his couch accidentally. I woke up around 2 in the morning, covered with a blanket, and Jeffrey asleep in the chair nearby, because apparently this man would rather destroy his spine than wake me up. That honestly might have been the moment I knew I was completely done for. By Friday night, even the guys at the garage had started giving us looks. One of them walked past me while Jeffrey was in the back and muttered, "Never seen him smile this much before," then immediately disappeared before I could respond. Cool. Awesome. No pressure there. That evening, Jeffrey closed the garage early, apparently because one of the lifts needed maintenance. At least that was the excuse he gave everyone else. The second the last employee left, he locked the front entrance and walked toward me with that look again, the one that made my pulse speed up instantly. "What?" I asked, already smiling. "You're staying tonight." Not really a question. I love that. "Bossy," I murmured. Jeffrey stopped in front of me, close enough that my hands automatically settled against his chest. "You hate it?" "No." His mouth twitched slightly. "Good." The garage felt strangely intimate empty like this. Quiet except for distant rain hitting the outside metal roof. The overhead lights dimmed lower than usual. Jeffrey's hand slid slowly to my waist, then stayed there. Warm. Steady. "You know what's weird?" he asked quietly. "What?" "I keep expecting this to disappear." That hit me immediately. I looked up at him carefully. "Why?" He hesitated, then admitted softly,
Because things that feel this good usually don't last. God, there it was again. That honesty that kept getting under my skin. I touched his face gently, thumb brushing along his jaw. "You're really scared of getting hurt again, huh?" Jeffrey laughed once quietly, but there wasn't much humor in it. "Turns out getting cheated on kind of messes with your confidence." My chest tightened hard. I hated imagining someone hurting him, which felt ridiculous considering I'd known him for barely over a week. But still, I hated it. "You know what I think?" I said softly. "What?" "I think you pretend to be less soft than you actually are." That surprised him. "You think I'm soft?" "I think you brought me extra garlic sauce because I mentioned liking it one time." Jeffrey looked genuinely offended. "That's just good customer service." I laughed. Then he kissed me. Slowly this time, like he needed it. His hand slid around my waist, pulling me closer until my chest pressed fully against his. The kiss deepened gradually after that, warm and familiar, and dangerous in the way all our kisses had started becoming. But underneath it now was something else too. Trust. That was scarier than anything physical. Jeffrey pulled back slightly, forehead resting against mine. "You know I really like you, right?" "Cool. Great." Now my heart was trying to physically leave my body. "I noticed," I whispered. "No, I mean..." He stopped himself, then tried again. "I haven't felt like this in a long time." The vulnerability in his voice nearly wrecked me completely. I slid my arms around his neck carefully. "You don't have to say everything perfectly," I murmured. "I know what you mean." Jeffrey looked at me for a long second after that. Then he smiled. Small. Real. The kind that only reached his face around me. And somehow that smile felt more intimate than any kiss we'd shared so far. "You staying upstairs tonight?" he asked softly. I nodded once. "Yeah." His hands tightened lightly at my waist, like he was happy to hear it. We ended up on the couch later, with rain still tapping steadily against the windows upstairs. I was half curled against his side, wearing one of his hoodies again, while Jeffrey absent-mindedly ran his fingers slowly along my arm. The movie playing was terrible. Neither of us cared. At some point, I tilted my head up toward him and asked quietly, "What made you call me back, really?" Jeffrey looked down at me. "The hoodie thing was real," he said. "I know. But honestly," his thumb brushed lightly against my sleeve, "I think I knew I was screwed the second you laughed at my dumb break joke." I smiled instantly. "That's your romantic origin story?" "Apparently." I laughed softly, and Jeffrey looked at me with this expression I still didn't fully know how to handle. Fond. That was the word. He looked at me fondly, and suddenly the room felt too warm again, too full, because I realized something terrifying then. I wasn't falling for Jeffrey slowly anymore. I already had. The scary thing about falling for someone isn't the big dramatic moments. It's the little ones, the tiny things that sneak up on you before you realize what's happening. Like noticing Jeffrey started keeping my favorite drinks in his fridge, or the fact I'd started leaving a toothbrush at his apartment without either of us acknowledging it officially, or how naturally my body relaxed whenever he touched me now. Like somewhere deep down, I already trusted him completely. That terrified me, because trust had never come easy for me. But Jeffrey made everything feel strangely simple. Not perfect, not fantasy movie dramatic, just real. 2 weeks after he called me back over that stupid hoodie, I was sitting in the garage office while he closed up for the night. Rain hammered outside again, harder this time. Jeffrey walked in, wiping grease from his hands with the rag before tossing it aside. "You still alive in here?" he asked. "Barely. Your coffee is terrible." "You still drank it?" "I was trying to support your business." He laughed softly and leaned down to kiss me once. Quick, automatic, like it was already habit. That tiny normalness hit me harder than anything else. I looked up at him after he pulled away. "What? You kiss me like someone who's done that for years." Jeffrey's expression softened instantly. "Feels like I could." God, there he went again, ruining me effortlessly. I stood up slowly from the chair and stepped closer until my hands rested against his chest. "You know you're unfairly good at saying things, right?" "I'm really not." "You absolutely are." Jeffrey smiled faintly. Then his hand slid gently along my waist under the oversized hoodie I was wearing. His hoodie, obviously, because apparently I'd stolen half his closet at this point. "You staying tonight?" he asked quietly. "Was planning on it." "Good." The way he said that made warmth spread through my chest immediately, like he genuinely liked having me there. Not tolerated, wanted. That mattered more to me than I wanted to admit. Upstairs later, we ended up tangled together on the couch while thunder rolled outside. Jeffrey had one arm wrapped around me while I rested against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Comfortable silence filled the room. And suddenly, I realized something. I wasn't nervous anymore. Not really. The panic from the beginning, the overthinking, the fear this would disappear, had faded somewhere along the way. Now being around him just felt safe, which honestly might have been the most intimate thing of all. "You're thinking again," Jeffrey murmured against my hair. "How do you always know?" "You get this look." "What look?" "Like your brain's trying to fight your feelings." I laughed quietly, because unfortunately, that was accurate. Jeffrey tilted his head down slightly. "What's going on?" I hesitated, then decided to be honest for once. "I think I'm scared how much I care about you already." The words hung there for a second. Jeffrey didn't joke, didn't brush it off. Instead, his fingers moved slowly along my back while he looked at me carefully. "Hugo," he said softly, "I don't think there's a right timeline for this stuff." "I know." "You want to know something embarrassing?" I smiled slightly. "Always." "The first night you left here," he looked mildly uncomfortable admitting this, "I kept replaying everything you said in my head like a teenager." I burst out laughing immediately. "No way." "It gets worse." "Oh my God." Jeffrey groaned quietly. "I smiled at my phone, reading your texts." "That's not embarrassing. That's adorable." I hate this conversation. I was still laughing when he kissed me again to shut me up. It worked immediately, because kissing Jeffrey still felt like stepping into something warm every single time. Familiar now, certain. His hand cupped my jaw, while mine slid into his hair automatically, and the kiss deepened slowly until both of us were smiling against each other. When we finally pulled apart, Jeffrey rested his forehead lightly against mine. "You know what's really messed up?" he murmured. "What?" "You came in for brake repairs and somehow completely wrecked my life." I laughed softly. "Your life seems fine." Yeah, he admitted quietly. Better, actually. That got me. Completely. I stared at him for a second too long before saying the thing I've been trying not to say for days. I think I'm falling in love with you. Silence. Real silence this time. Jeffrey just looked at me. Not shocked, not scared, just emotional in a way I'd never seen from him before. Then his eyes closed briefly, and he laughed once under his breath like he couldn't believe something. What? I asked nervously. You beat me to it. My heart stopped. Actually stopped. Jeffrey opened his eyes again and looked directly at me. I love you too, Hugo. And somehow, those words didn't feel rushed. They didn't feel reckless. They felt inevitable. Like every moment since that stupid grinding brake noise had been leading here. To this couch, this storm outside, this man looking at me like I mattered. Jeffrey kissed me again afterward, slower than before, and I melted into him completely, while rain hammered against the windows and thunder rolled somewhere far away. I never did become emotionally normal around him after that, but I don't think Jeffrey minded.